And I'm welcoming to our panel David Glancy, who is the founder and CEO of San Francisco Wine School. Alder Yarrow, a noted wine blogger and the founder of Vinography. Alder was one of the first wine bloggers. Yep, the very first, and still going strong. And we have the lovely Sara Schneider. Sara is contributing wine editor to the Robb Report, formerly of Sunset Magazine. Sara has many fans. Right. Yesterday.
Recently.
Okay, so we're here, this panel is here to talk to you a little bit about how Sauvignon Blanc is being perceived by their audiences, correct? By your readers or by the perceptions that you have of the public perception, the consumer perception of the grape variety, right? And then we're not going to go too long because we don't want our wines to get off temperature, and we're going to crack right into our tasting, and Joy Marilees will join us again. So let's get brief statements from each of our panelists, and then we'll get right to our wines and continue the conversation. Sara, would you like to start? Ladies first.
Sure. The lens that I see Sauvignon Blanc through is, I know Deborah said I'm with the Robb Report, and that's true, but I was with Sunset Magazine for more than 20 years. And so I look at that readership and their drinking habits, and it's a large swath of general lifestyle, active lifestyle people. And a few years back, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, we really didn't know much about their drinking habits. And so we did some deep dive research, and we found out that Sunset readers drank, and this was 10 years ago, I think it's probably double now, but drank almost 11 million glasses of wine a week. And it was astonishing. And so it's clear that they look for, I mean, they're drinking Tuesday night wine, and not just Saturday night wine special dinner. And through the years, I've seen some good news for Sauvignon Blanc in those readers. They, a lot of them, and this is sort of anecdotal evidence, but a lot of them did tell me that they were switching out their Chardonnay, and that Sauvignon Blanc was becoming their go-to white, which is good news. I think that overall it delivered a value to the price they were paying that worked for them. Another side to it at Sunset that I think was always good news for Sauvignon Blanc, and that was that we did a lot of direct food and wine pairings. And we had the test kitchens, and the food editors would call me and say, got these dishes out, what do we put with them? And so I dive into the sample room or the cellar and pull out a range. And I'm telling you, more often than not, white was what was called for. I had these beautiful red wines in there, but no, these dishes, the way that we were cooking now in this day and age, called more for white. And within that, I would put a range up against, often the dishes had vinegar involved, vinaigrette, citrus, and it often came down to Sauvignon Blanc. So again, I think it is a great wine for the way those readers were eating as well. But on the other side of the ledger, I also, they were drinking Sauvignon Blanc. They do drink a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. But I also heard a lot of confusion. And to John's presentation this morning, thank you for that, John. I really enjoyed that. You should have been talking to Sunset readers on that. I think that there is, and we've been talking about the factors all day already for this, more chance of confusion in Sauvignon Blanc than almost any other variety on the West Coast. And it means that they've been drinking the wine, but they never quite know what they're going to get if they experiment with a new producer and they don't know the region. And this is probably for those range of factors that I think, David, in your piece here, you talked about how successful it is and versatile, one of the most versatile. It's one of those things where maybe its success is its downfall in a way, because it grows across so many different climate ranges, as we've heard, and that is going to be a huge factor in its profile. What's done in the vineyard, as we've been hearing, huge factor in its profile. Winemaking choices after that, it gets kind of bewildering. And oak, no oak, and that obviously comes into play. And lately, confusion has come out about pricing. I don't know if you've been watching the prices of Sauvignon Blanc. I don't think this has afflicted Lake County yet. You're really in a sweet spot here.
Yeah, good value.
But you look down at Napa, and you can find a lot of Sauvignon Blancs that are in the $80 to $90 range, $150, $400. There's one very well-known producer that I'm told has theirs priced at $1,200. So that, again, is adding to the confusion. And so I was talking to Peter Molnar earlier, and he made a really interesting comment. He said, this is a wine that everybody's drinking, but nobody's talking about. So I actually think that what's happening here this weekend is critical, and it's part of it is our job to get messages out about Sauvignon Blanc. But an event like this, where people can come up tomorrow and taste across a lineup, goes a long way to start the conversation. And I think it's time that people were talking about Sauvignon Blanc like they do the styles of Chardonnay, the regions of Cabernet. I think those conversations should now start about Sauvignon Blanc. This is a good place to start.
Thanks for that, Sarah. That's a very salient point. And I think tomorrow will be kind of a case in point for seeing that happen in action, people tasting across different style camps. Alder, can you weigh in, please, here? On those $200 Sauvignon Blanc, please?
No, yeah, nobody should be charging $200 for Sauvignon Blanc. I agree with some of the stuff that you said, and I think I disagree with some of the stuff you said.
Well, we've disagreed before, Alder.
I think one of the reasons that Sauvignon Blanc has become successful to the degree that it has is because, in many ways, despite some of the variations you speak about, it is a very predictable wine for most people. They know that they can go to a store and they can pay, between $12 and $22 for a bottle, and in general, they're going to get a good wine. And as somebody said earlier, thank you, New Zealand, for proving that to people. And I think we've, around the world, people tend to have upheld that level of quality. I think the one exception to that is oak, which I think does represent some of that variation and that unpredictability for consumers. And from my standpoint, is the worst thing that you can do to Sauvignon Blanc. So I'm going to just go on the record and say less oak, please.
Duly noted.
I'm not a fan of the style. Yes, I've had some of the best ones from Grave that the world says are amazing, and frankly, none of them are as good as some of the best things from the Loire that show no oak. So not a fan of the style, and I do think that consumers sometimes find it jarring when they're used to drinking, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and then they go and pick up something, and all of a sudden it's got a wholly different character that in some cases is indistinguishable from the cheap Chardonnay that they might have been drinking before. And it's a little ironic in a situation like this where we are talking about a lot of the really intricate differences and details between the wines, which I think is really interesting and valuable and geeky for us to do as the trade and as winemakers. And, if there was one thing that I learned today just sort of about the amazing variation in clonal variety of Sauvignon Blanc, how much more interesting it might be to try and have wines that represent multiple clonal varieties, as they seem to be doing more in France than here in the United States. So plant more than just FPS 01, get out there and do some other stuff. But
That'll cry.
but I think despite those variations, which are really interesting, I think the expression of Sauvignon Blanc, even its range is relatively compact, and I think that lends itself to that predictability with consumers, and I think that has contributed to its commercial success.
Its overall appeal.
It's yummy. Keep making the good stuff, and I think as long as it doesn't creep up in price, people still buy it.
Right. Great. Thanks, Alder. We know that there may be oak if the wine's over $40, right?
Almost
so
certainly.
Yeah, sure. So the higher the price tag, the more likelihood there's going to be oak on the wine, right? So we can kind of use that as a way of navigating. David, what do you hear from your students and from members of the trade and from the sommelier community?
I speak for the sommeliers. No, I'm kidding. So every thought I have was in that little article I wrote, so I've got nothing left.
Sorry, you're not off the hook, buddy. Come on.
Yeah. So I come at it from a couple of different angles. Certainly from the consumer experience, because we teach consumers as well, and there's 6 to 8 grape varieties you need to know as a beginner consumer, and Sauvignon Blanc is certainly in there. To Deborah's point about if it's $40, it's probably got oak on it. I often say, look, if the winery has a Sauvignon Blanc and a reserve Sauvignon Blanc, the difference probably is it was an oak, and along with Alder, on average, I prefer the unoaked, but that's not completely there. I do like white Bordeaux. I definitely like white Bordeaux. Chateau Carbonneau, I love. There are California examples where there's barrel fermentation. There is a lot of diversity in what's going on. I mean, we look at things like Matthias and White, which is Sauvignon Blanc, Ribolla Gialla, and Friends. And lots of natural wines out of Friuli and Slovenia that are using Sauvignon Blanc as one of the big pieces of them. But it still has its personality in the mix of those wines. But if we go back to the consumers, and if they only need to know 6 to 8 wines in their first few years experimenting, getting to know wine, the typical style being predictable, as Alder said, of, unoaked, citrusy, high acid. And when they've gotten through that, then I say, well, if you know of the 6 to 8 basic grapes, what do you like? All right, if you like Sauvignon Blanc, here are some more grapes to try in comparison. Genetically different grapes, but a style, and using Sauvignon Blanc is sort of an anchor for a style. And if we just look at, are we trying to appease the wine critics more or the mass consumers and make some money? I think 9 times out of 10, Sauvignon Blanc has the edge in winning the Porch Pounder competition. Just readily drinkable wines. And, in a hot summer day, I mean, it's Sauv Blanc by day and Cab by night.
Sounds like a recipe for me. All right. Great. Thanks so much, panel. I have to encourage Joy Marilees to find her way up here quickly. Our wines are going to come off temperature. We need to get through this tasting. So, Joy, please join us. We're tasting